Hi, my beautiful, precious family. Welcome back to our cherished Mr. Peter stories. My heart fills with pure joy to be with you all again. Dear Heavenly Father, I come before you with a grateful heart to pray for my beautiful family. Lord, please wrap your loving arms around each one reading this today. Guide their footsteps through life's journey, protect them from all harm, and shower their paths with your endless blessings. May you fill their homes with laughter, their hearts with peace, and their lives with abundant love. Give them strength when they're weak, hope when they're discouraged, and wisdom to make the right choices. Keep their families safe, their relationships strong, and their spirits lifted. Thank you for the gift of life and the precious bond we share. In your loving name, Amen. My dearest readers, today's story flows a bit longer as I've poured extra love into crafting it. Please stay with me. I promise you'll find something meaningful within these words. And my beloved family, your thoughts mean everything to me. Do you feel my stories run too long? Should I make them shorter? Or do they touch your hearts just as they are? Your feelings light my path. Now, with boundless love flowing from my heart to yours, let's begin this beautiful journey together. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Hotel cast golden light across the ballroom, their brilliance dulled by the weight of expectations that hung heavy in the air. Harlan Jace stood at the periphery of the crowd, his 6'3" frame commanding attention even in stillness. His custom-made Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like armor, the black fabric a stark contrast against his tanned skin and sharp jawline that seemed carved from marble. At 32, he'd built an empire that stretched across continents, but tonight, surrounded by New York's elite at the annual Metropolitan Charity Gala, he felt nothing but emptiness. The same faces, the same games, the same hollow pursuits of power and pleasure. His dark eyes, often described as penetrating by those brave enough to hold his gaze, surveyed the room with practiced indifference. "Mr. Jace," a silky voice interrupted his thoughts. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." He turned to find another perfectly coiffed socialite, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo that must have taken hours to perfect. She extended her hand, red nails gleaming under the chandelier light. "Madison Winters." Harlan took her hand briefly, the touch perfunctory. "Charmed." His voice carried just enough warmth to be polite, but the Arctic chill underneath was unmistakable. Madison wasn't deterred. They never were. "I've followed your work with great interest. Your recent acquisition of Tech Dynamics was brilliant." "Was it?" He took a sip of his whiskey, 18-year-old Macallan that tasted like ash in his mouth. "I find hostile takeovers rather mundane these days." Before Madison could respond, Drake Kingston, Harlan's best friend and head of legal affairs, appeared at his side. "Harlan, the governor's requesting a moment of your time." "If you'll excuse me," Harlan said to Madison, not waiting for her response before striding away. "That's the third one tonight," Drake muttered, matching his pace. "At this rate, you'll hit triple digits by midnight. I stopped counting after 50. Harlan's voice was tight with irritation. "Why do they persist?" "Oh, I don't know." Drake's tone dripped with sarcasm. "Maybe because you're New York's most eligible bachelor, because you've turned down literally every woman who's shown interest for the past 5 years. The chase, my friend, is intoxicating." Harlan stopped abruptly, causing Drake to nearly collide with him. "The chase implies there's something worth pursuing." That's when he heard it. A laugh. Not the practiced tittering that echoed around the ballroom, but something real, something that cut through the artificial atmosphere like a blade of pure sunlight. His head turned automatically, seeking its source. She stood in a circle of admirers, but unlike everyone else in the room, she seemed genuinely engaged in conversation. Her dark skin glowed golden under the chandelier lights, and her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo that defied gravity and convention. The burgundy gown she wore hugged curves that made his throat go dry, but it was her smile that stopped his heart. Brilliant, genuine, and completely unconcerned with who might be watching. "Don't even think about it," Drake warned, following his gaze. "That's Lana Rory." "The new federal judge?" Harlan's interest deepened. "The same. She's already turned down 3 billionaires and a Saudi prince. They say she's even more selective than you are." A smile curved Harlan's lips, the first genuine one of the evening. "Tell me more." "Graduated top of her class from Harvard Law, youngest federal judge in the circuit. Known for being brutally fair and completely incorruptible. Word is, she turned down a 7-figure offer from Sterling and Myers to stay in public service." As if sensing their attention, Lana turned. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for the first time in his life, Harlan Jace felt his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. Her eyes weren't just brown. They were pools of amber lit from within, challenging and amused all at once. She held his gaze for precisely 3 seconds before dismissing him entirely, turning back to her conversation as if he were just another face in the crowd. The casual dismissal hit him like a physical blow. "I see that look," Drake groaned. "Don't do it, Harlan. She's not like the others. She can't be bought, impressed, or intimidated." "Perfect." Harlan handed his empty glass to a passing waiter and straightened his jacket. "She sounds exactly like what I've been waiting for." He made his way across the ballroom, the crowd parting before him like waves before a ship's bow. As he approached her group, he caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing a recent Supreme Court decision, and Lana was systematically dismantling the majority opinion with surgical precision. "While Justice Roberts makes a compelling argument about statutory interpretation," she was saying, "he completely overlooks the legislative intent behind the Clean Water Act. The congressional record clearly shows—" "Judge Rory," Harlan interrupted smoothly, "I find your analysis fascinating." She turned to him slowly, one eyebrow raised in a way that suggested she was not impressed by the interruption. "Mr. Jace, I wasn't aware you had an interest in environmental law." "I have an interest in many things," he replied, holding her gaze, "particularly in perspectives that challenge conventional wisdom." "How diplomatic of you." Her smile was polite, but carried an edge. "Considering your company's recent lawsuit attempting to circumvent those very environmental protections." The others in their circle shifted uncomfortably, but Harlan felt a thrill of excitement. Finally, someone who didn't simper or retreat. "Perhaps we could discuss our opposing views in more detail," he suggested. "Over dinner." "Mr. Jace," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement, "are you attempting to influence a federal judge?" "Not at all," he replied smoothly. "I'm attempting to ask a beautiful woman to dinner. The fact that she's a federal judge just makes the conversation more interesting." "Smooth," she acknowledged, "but I make it a policy not to date men who view the law as an inconvenient obstacle to their ambitions." "And I make it a policy not to date at all," he countered. "Yet here I am, breaking my own rules." "Are you?" She took a sip of champagne, studying him over the rim of her glass. "Breaking rules, or just engaging in another hostile takeover?" The question caught him off guard, and for the first time in years, Harlan found himself without a ready response. Lana's smile widened slightly at his silence. "That's what I thought," she said softly. "You know, Mr. Jace, not everything in life can be acquired through force of will or financial leverage. Some things have to be earned." She turned to leave, but he caught her arm gently. The contact sent electricity through his fingers, and he felt her slight intake of breath. "Then tell me how to earn it," he said, his voice low and intense. "Tell me what it would take to prove I'm more than my reputation suggests." Lana looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his eyes. The challenge in her gaze made his pulse quicken. "That's the problem with men like you, Mr. Jace," she said. "You always want someone else to give you the answers. Figure it out yourself, if you can." She slipped away from his touch and disappeared into the crowd, leaving him standing there with the ghost of her warmth on his fingers and the scent of her perfume, something exotic and spicy, lingering in the air. Drake appeared at his side. "Well, that went well." "It went perfectly," Harlan said, watching the space where she had vanished. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, every nerve ending singing with anticipation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and polite deflections, but his mind kept returning to those amber eyes and the way she had dismissed him so effortlessly. He found himself watching her from across the room, noting how she moved with natural grace, how her laugh carried above the crowd's murmur, how she commanded attention without seeking it. As the gala began to wind down, he saw her heading toward the coat check. Without thinking, he followed, catching up to her just as she received her wrap, a simple black cashmere shawl that somehow looked more elegant than all the designer furs in the room. "Judge Rory," he called out softly. She turned, that same amused expression playing across her features. "Still here, Mr. Jace? I would have thought you'd have moved on to more conquerable territory by now." "I find myself singularly uninterested in conquerable territory," he replied, stepping closer. "What I am interested in is having dinner with you. No agenda, no business talk, no attempts at hostile takeovers, just dinner." "And why should I believe that?" she asked, but there was genuine curiosity in her voice now. "Because I haven't been able to think about anything else since you walked away from me," he admitted. "Because you're the first person in years who's made me feel uncertain. And because I suspect you're just as intrigued by me as I am by you." She studied him for a long moment, and he felt like he was being judged in her courtroom. Finally, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card. "My chambers, Monday at 2 p.m., she said, holding out the card. "If you can convince my clerk you have legitimate business to discuss, you might get 5 minutes of my time." He took the card, their fingers brushing. This time, they both felt the spark. "That's all I need," he said confidently. "We'll see." She adjusted her shawl and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Jace, don't wear the armor next time. I prefer honest men to perfect ones." She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving him standing there with her card in his hand and the distinct feeling that his life had just changed irrevocably. As his driver brought the Bentley around, Harlan sat in the quiet leather interior, still holding Lana's card. He could smell her perfume on his fingers where they had touched, could see the challenge in her eyes when she looked at him. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what his next move should be, and the uncertainty was intoxicating. His phone buzzed, Drake texting to remind him about tomorrow's board meeting. But tomorrow felt like another lifetime. Tonight, in this moment, Harlan Jace, the man who had everything, finally understood what it meant to want something he couldn't simply take. He traced the embossed letters on her card. The Honorable Lana Rory, United States District Court. Below it, in elegant script, was a quote, "Justice is not just what the law demands, but what humanity requires." A smile played across his lips as he slipped the card into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. The game had changed, and for once he wasn't sure of the rules, but one thing was certain. He had never wanted to play more in his life. Chapter 2. The Dance of Minds. Monday arrived with the weight of anticipation. Harlan stood before the federal courthouse, its imposing granite facade a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play. He'd forgone his usual power suit, opting instead for a simple charcoal blazer and dark jeans. casual enough to show he'd heard her request for honesty, but refined enough to maintain his dignity. The security guard eyed his ID with suspicious thoroughness, perhaps unused to seeing one of New York's most powerful men subjected to standard screening procedures. Harlan accepted the scrutiny with unusual grace, his mind focused on the upcoming encounter. Judge Rory's chambers were on the 5th floor, at the end of a long corridor lined with law books and tradition. Her clerk, a sharp-eyed young woman named Zara Chen, regarded him with open skepticism. "Judge Rory is in conference," she announced, her tone suggesting she'd rather send him away. "She has a very busy schedule today." "I have an appointment," Harlan replied quietly, noting how the clerk's protective instincts mirrored Lana's own strength. "She's expecting me." Zara's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Jace?" Before he could respond, Lana's voice carried from the inner office. "It's all right, Zara, send him in." The clerk's surprise was evident as she gestured toward the heavy wooden door. Harlan caught a glimpse of a slight smile playing at her lips. Clearly, her judge didn't make a habit of entertaining unexpected visitors. Lana's chambers were a study in controlled chaos. Law books lined the walls, their spines showing signs of frequent use. Case files were stacked in neat piles on every surface, each tagged with color-coded markers. And in the midst of it all, she sat behind a massive oak desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed a document. She didn't look up immediately. "You're 3 minutes early, Mr. Jace." "I believe in respecting other people's time." He remained standing, taking in the details of her sanctuary. A framed photo of her with her parents at her swearing-in ceremony. A wall of thank-you notes from pro bono clients. A small collection of African art pieces that added warmth to the institutional setting. "And yet you've taken mine without a clear purpose." She finally looked up, removing her glasses. Today she wore a cream-colored blouse that somehow managed to be both professional and alluring. "What legitimate business brings you to my chambers?" "The Legal Aid Foundation's annual fundraiser," he replied, producing an envelope from his jacket. "I'd like to make a donation." Her eyes narrowed. "The foundation has an office downtown and a website, but they don't have you." He placed the envelope on her desk. "I wanted to deliver this personally and to ask if you'd consider joining me at the fundraiser this Friday night." Lana picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "Are you attempting to buy my attention, Mr. Jace?" "Not at all." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm attempting to show you that I can support causes you believe in without expecting anything in return. The donation is unconditional, regardless of your answer about Friday night." She opened the envelope and her eyes widened slightly at the number on the check. "This is substantial. The foundation does good work. Work that matters." He took a seat across from her desk without waiting for an invitation. "And before you ask, no, this isn't tax-deductible. It's a personal donation, not a corporate one." "Why?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. "Because you made me curious about what you value. So I did my research. The foundation helps people who can't afford justice get access to it. That seems like something worth supporting." Lana studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "The fundraiser is a black-tie event. I own a tuxedo. There will be speeches about social justice and equality under the law. I look forward to being educated. My parents will be there. They're civil rights activists who generally distrust corporate America." A smile tugged at his lips. "Are you trying to scare me away, Judge Rory?" "I'm trying to understand why you're trying so hard." She leaned back in her chair, her posture a mix of professional authority and feminine grace that made his pulse quicken. "You could have any woman in New York. I don't want any woman in New York." The words came out more intensely than he'd intended. I want to have dinner with a woman who challenges my assumptions and makes me question my choices. I want to spend an evening with someone who sees past the facade I've built and demands something real. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. And you think that's me? I think you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I have something to prove. She stood, walking around her desk to perch on its edge, closer to him. The movement brought a whisper of her perfume, the same spicy, exotic scent from the gala. And what exactly are you trying to prove, Mr. Jace? That I'm more than my reputation suggests. He remained seated, acutely aware of their new proximity, that I'm capable of earning something instead of taking it. The fundraiser starts at 8, she said finally. I'll meet you there. I could pick you up. No. Her smile widened slightly. Some things have to be earned, remember? He stood, bringing them face to face. This close, he could see flecks of gold in her eyes, could hear the slight catch in her breath as he moved into her space. I remember everything about our conversation, Judge Rory. Lana, she corrected softly. If we're going to dinner, you should call me Lana. Lana, he repeated, testing the intimacy of her name on his tongue. I look forward to Friday night. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Mr. Jace? Harlan, he corrected, looking back at her. Harlan. She held up the check. Thank you for this. It will help a lot of people. That's the idea. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Harlan threw himself into work, closing deals and terrorizing boardrooms with his usual efficiency, but his mind kept drifting to amber eyes and challenging smiles. He found himself researching the Legal Aid Foundation's cases, reading up on recent Supreme Court decisions, preparing himself for conversations that would matter to her. Friday evening found him arriving at the Plaza Hotel precisely at 8. The fundraiser was being held in the Grand Ballroom, the same space where they'd first met, but tonight it felt different. The air was charged with possibility. He spotted her immediately. She wore a deep blue gown that seemed to catch and hold the light, making her skin glow like burnished gold. Her hair was styled in elegant twists that revealed the graceful line of her neck. She stood with an older couple he recognized from the photo in her office. Her parents. Taking a deep breath, he approached the group. Lana saw him coming, and something flickered in her eyes. Appreciation, amusement, as she took in his appearance. Mom, Dad, she said as he reached them. This is Harlan Jace. Harlan, my parents, Marcus and Ruby Rory. Marcus Rory's handshake was firm, his gaze assessing. We've heard about you, Mr. Jace. All bad things, I hope, Harlan replied with a smile. It would be a shame to have my reputation softening. Ruby Rory laughed, a warm sound that explained where Lana got her genuine laugh from. Oh, I like this one, Lana. He's not afraid to poke fun at himself. Don't encourage him, Mom, Lana said, but her eyes danced with amusement. His ego barely fits in the room as it is. The evening progressed with surprising ease. Harlan found himself genuinely engaged in discussions about social justice and corporate responsibility with Marcus, while Ruby regaled him with stories of Lana's childhood determination to right every wrong she encountered. During dinner, he ended up seated between Lana and a Supreme Court justice. The conversation flowed from legal theory to philosophy to personal experiences, and he found himself more intellectually stimulated than he'd been in years. You're full of surprises, Lana murmured, as they finished their main course. I didn't expect you to have such detailed knowledge of constitutional law. I believe in being prepared. He turned to face her, their shoulders almost touching. And I believe in understanding what matters to people who matter to me. Color rose in her cheeks, but before she could respond, the music started. A slow, elegant waltz filled the ballroom. Would you dance with me? he asked, standing and offering his hand. She regarded his outstretched hand for a moment. Are you asking as Harlan Jace, corporate raider, or as the man who just spent 20 minutes discussing equal protection with my father? I'm asking as someone who very much wants to hold you in his arms, he answered honestly. She placed her hand in his, and the contact sent electricity through his veins. He led her to the dance floor, drawing her into the traditional waltz position. Her hand was warm in his, her waist firm beneath his palm. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. The rest of the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the music, the movement, and the growing tension between them. You dance well, she observed, her voice slightly breathless. I had lessons, part of becoming what was expected of me. He guided her through a turn, bringing her back slightly closer than before. But I've never enjoyed it until now. Her fingers tightened slightly on his shoulder. You're very good at this. At dancing? At making a woman feel like she's the only person in the room. He drew her infinitesimally closer, his lips near her ear. Tonight, you are the only person in the room. She pulled back slightly to look at him, their faces inches apart. The music swelled around them, but all he could hear was the sound of their breathing, slightly out of sync, slightly too fast. This is dangerous, she whispered. What is? The way you make me feel. The way you're breaking down all my carefully constructed walls. His hand tightened at her waist. Maybe some walls need to be broken down. The music ended, but they remained locked together for a moment longer, the air between them thick with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Lana stepped back, though her hand lingered in his. I should say good night, she said softly. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Let me drive you home. She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. Not yet, Harlan. Some things have to be earned, remember? He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I'm a very quick learner. We'll see. She retrieved her clutch from their table, said goodbye to her parents, and headed for the exit. Harlan watched her go, the phantom warmth of her body still pressed against his. The evening had exceeded his every expectation, and yet he felt more unsettled than ever. For the first time in his life, he was pursuing something he couldn't guarantee he'd win. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lana. Thank you for an unexpected evening, and for making my parents think there might be hope for corporate America after all. He smiled, typing back, Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I'm more than my reputation. Her response came quickly. You haven't proven anything yet, but you've made me curious to see what else you might be. Harlan sat in his car for a long moment, reading and rereading her message. The game had changed again, becoming something deeper, more dangerous, and infinitely more exciting. He had spent his life acquiring things, building his empire through force of will and strategic calculation. But for the first time, he understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be acquired. They had to be earned, moment by moment, choice by choice. Starting the engine, he made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would be worthy of the trust she was beginning to show him. He would prove that beneath the armor of Harlan Jace, corporate raider, there was a man capable of something real, something lasting, something true. The city lights blurred past his windows as he drove home, but all he could see was the way she had looked at him during their dance, challenging, intrigued, and just a little bit afraid of the connection growing between them. It was a look that promised everything, if only he could prove himself worthy of it. For the first time in his adult life, Harlan Jace went to bed thinking not about acquisitions or power plays, but about the way a woman's hand felt in his and the infinite possibilities contained in a single dance. Chapter 3. Power Moves. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harlan's office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. He stood looking out over the Manhattan skyline, his phone pressed to his ear, listening to Drake's increasingly agitated voice. "You can't be serious, Harlan. $5 million to the Legal Aid Foundation. The board is going to have questions." "Let them question." Harlan's voice carried the steel edge that had made him famous in boardrooms across the globe. "It's my personal money, Drake. I don't need the board's approval to donate it. This is about her, isn't it? Judge Rory." Drake's sigh crackled through the speaker. "You're trying to impress her. I'm trying to support a worthy cause." Harlan turned from the window, his reflection in the glass showing a slight smile. "The fact that it matters to her is relevant." "Relevant?" Drake's laugh was sharp. "You've never shown interest in social justice before. Now suddenly you're philanthropy's biggest champion? The timing is suspicious." "Maybe I'm evolving." Harlan's attention was drawn to a notification on his computer screen. His smile faded. "I have to go. Something's come up." He ended the call and clicked on the news alert. The headline made his blood run cold. Tech Dynamics case assigned to Judge Lana Rory. The acquisition he'd been working on for months, the hostile takeover of Tech Dynamics, was now going to be decided by the very woman he was pursuing. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Jace, your legal team is assembled in the conference room." "Thank you, Claire." He straightened his tie, his mind already racing through scenarios. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." The conference room was tense when he entered. A dozen lawyers in expensive suits sat around the massive table, their faces showing varying degrees of concern. At the head of the table, William Sterling, his lead counsel, stood with his hands pressed flat against the polished surface. "We need to file for a change of venue," Sterling announced without preamble. "Judge Rory's reputation for being tough on corporate acquisitions is well known, and given your personal connection, there could be accusations of impropriety." Harlan took his seat slowly, deliberately. "No." "No." Sterling's face reddened. "Harlan, be reasonable. This deal is worth billions. We can't risk it being derailed because you're trying to romance the judge." "We will not file for a change of venue." Harlan's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "We will present our case fairly and honestly, and Judge Rory will make her decision based on the law. End of discussion." "This is madness," Sterling muttered, but fell silent under Harlan's steady gaze. The meeting continued. Strategies were discussed, but Harlan's mind was already elsewhere. He knew what he had to do. An hour later, he stood outside Lana's chambers once again. This time, Zara didn't even try to stop him, just gave him a knowing look and buzzed him through. Lana was standing by her window, her back to the door. She wore a fitted black dress that somehow managed to be both professional and devastating. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You knew about the Tech Dynamics case." "I received the assignment this morning." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I've already begun reviewing the preliminary documents." "I won't ask you to recuse yourself," he said quietly. "I know." A small smile played at her lips. "That's why I haven't done so already." He took a step closer, drawn to her despite the professional distance they needed to maintain. "This could complicate things between us." "Things between us were complicated from the start, Harlan." She moved to her desk, maintaining the space between them. "I will judge this case on its merits, nothing more, nothing less." "I wouldn't expect anything else." He watched her settle into her chair, the afternoon light catching the gold undertones in her skin. "But I want you to know that whatever your decision, it won't change how I feel about you." She looked up sharply, their eyes meeting across the desk. And how exactly do you feel about me, Mr. Jace? The formality in her tone stung, but he understood its necessity. I feel that you're the most intriguing woman I've ever met. That you challenge me in ways no one else has dared to. That when I'm with you, all the power and wealth and influence I've accumulated means nothing compared to earning one genuine smile. Color rose in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. Those are dangerous words in the current situation. They're honest words. He moved to the door, understanding that this meeting needed to be brief. I'll see you in court, Judge Rory. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal preparations and stolen glances across courtrooms. Harlan attended every hearing, watching as Lana systematically dissected both sides' arguments with razor-sharp precision. She was magnificent on the bench, her intelligence and integrity shining through every ruling. The case itself was complex. Tech Dynamics had developed revolutionary green energy technology, but their management was running the company into the ground. Harlan's hostile takeover bid was either a rescue mission or a corporate raid, depending on which side was arguing. On the final day of hearings, Harlan took the stand. Under direct examination, he laid out his plans for Tech Dynamics, preserving jobs, investing in research and development, maintaining the company's environmental focus. But it was during cross-examination that the real test came. Mr. Jace, the opposing counsel began, isn't it true that your company has a history of acquiring technology firms and stripping them for parts? Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. I'll allow it, Lana said, her voice perfectly neutral. The witness may answer. Harlan met her eyes briefly before responding. My company has a history of acquiring underperforming assets and making them profitable. Sometimes that means restructuring, yes, but in this case, Tech Dynamics' value lies in its innovation and its people. Dismantling it would destroy that value. And we're supposed to take your word for that? The lawyer's tone was skeptical. Your reputation suggests otherwise. My reputation, Harlan said slowly, still holding Lana's gaze, doesn't tell the whole story. People can change. They can learn to value things beyond profit margins and market share. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Lana's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes, understanding perhaps, or appreciation for the deeper meaning in his words. The hearing concluded late in the afternoon. Lana announced she would issue her ruling the following morning, and the courtroom began to empty. As Harlan gathered his papers, he felt her presence before he saw her approach. "Walk with me, Mr. Jace," she said quietly. They moved through the courthouse corridors in silence, eventually finding themselves in a small courtyard garden. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, casting long shadows across the carefully maintained flowers. "That was quite a performance today," she said finally, turning to face him. Every word was true. He kept his hands in his pockets, resisting the urge to reach for her. "I meant what I said about changing, about learning to value different things." "I believe you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, could see the way the fading light caught in her eyes. "But it doesn't change what I have to do." "I know." He smiled slightly. "You'll rule against me tomorrow." She blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because you're honest, Lana. Because you believe in justice more than expedience. And because the law, in this case, doesn't support my position, no matter how noble my intentions might be." She looked at him for a long moment, something soft and wondering in her expression. "You've really changed, haven't you? You changed me." He took a step closer, the space between them charged with electricity. "You made me want to be better, to be worthy of your respect." "Harlan," her voice was barely a whisper, "I know we can't." He gestured vaguely at the courthouse behind them. "Not yet. Not until this case is settled, but tomorrow, after you've ruled against me and broken my corporate heart, have dinner with me." A smile tugged at her lips. "You're awfully confident about what my ruling will be." "I'm confident about what's right." He reached out, allowing himself to brush a loose strand of hair from her face. "And I'm confident about how I feel about you." She caught his hand as it retreated, holding it for just a moment. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "after the ruling." They parted ways in the gathering dusk, each heading to their respective cars. Harlan watched her drive away, feeling strangely at peace, despite knowing he was about to lose a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. The next morning, Lana ruled against the takeover. Her opinion was masterfully written, acknowledging the potential benefits of Harlan's plan, while ultimately finding that it didn't meet the legal standards required. The Tech Dynamics board celebrated, their lawyers exchanged congratulatory handshakes, and Harlan's legal team began discussing appeals. But Harlan himself simply sat there, watching Lana leave the bench with her usual grace. He had lost the case, but somehow it felt like a victory. He had proven himself capable of putting principle above profit, of accepting defeat with dignity, of being worthy of her respect. That evening, as he waited for her at an intimate Italian restaurant in the village, his phone buzzed with messages from board members and shareholders, all demanding explanations. He ignored them all. Tonight wasn't about business or power or money. Tonight was about a woman who had taught him that true worth couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a deep green dress that made his heart stop. Her hair was down tonight, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she had traded her judicial authority for a softer, more approachable elegance. "You look beautiful," he said, standing to greet her. "You look surprisingly cheerful for someone who just lost billions of dollars," she replied, but her smile was warm. "I gained something more valuable." He held her chair as she sat, then took his own seat across from her. "I gained the respect of someone whose opinion actually matters to me." "Careful, Mr. Jace," she teased. "People might think you're going soft." "Let them." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. This time she didn't pull away. "Some things are worth more than a reputation for being ruthless." The candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across their faces. Tonight, there were no titles between them, no legal battles, no corporate empires. Tonight, they were just a man and a woman, discovering that sometimes losing a battle could lead to winning something far more precious. As they talked and laughed and shared stories over wine and pasta, Harlan realized that for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. Free from the expectations that had driven him for so long, free from the need to always win, free to simply be himself with someone who saw past all his carefully constructed facades. And in Lana's eyes, he saw the same freedom, the same joy in discovering that sometimes the most powerful moves weren't about winning or losing, but about finding the courage to be vulnerable with someone who understood your strength. Chapter 4. The Kitchen Catastrophe. Harlan Jace stood in his penthouse kitchen, surrounded by chaos of his own making. Cookbooks lay open on every surface, their pages marked with sticky notes and smudged with various ingredients. The marble countertops, usually pristine, were dusted with flour and dotted with spills of olive oil and wine. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, studying the recipe with the same intensity he usually reserved for merger documents. "It's just chemistry. Follow the steps." 3 weeks had passed since the Tech Dynamics ruling, and his relationship with Lana had evolved into something both wonderful and terrifying. They'd shared dinners at exclusive restaurants, attended concerts at Carnegie Hall, and spent long hours walking through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wanted to show her a side of himself that no one else had ever seen. His phone buzzed, a text from Drake. Are you sure about this? I can have Jean-Georges cater on 0 notice. Harlan smiled, typing back, "No cheating. I'm doing this myself." The elevator chimed, announcing Lana's arrival. His heart rate spiked. He hadn't given her access to his private elevator for nothing. He wanted tonight to feel intimate, special. "Harlan?" Her voice carried through the apartment, followed by the soft click of heels on hardwood. "Something smells interesting." He turned to find her in the kitchen doorway, looking devastatingly beautiful, in a simple black dress that showed off her curves without trying too hard. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. "What happened in here?" she asked, amusement dancing in her expression. "I'm cooking dinner." He gestured proudly to the chaos around him, or at least, "I'm attempting to." She moved closer, picking up one of the cookbooks. "You're making coco vin? From scratch?" Her tone suggested she wasn't sure whether to be impressed or concerned. "I wanted to do something special." He caught her hand, pulling her close enough to kiss her softly. "Something to show you that I can be more than boardrooms and business deals, by potentially burning down your penthouse." But she was smiling against his lips. "I'll have you know I've been practicing." He released her reluctantly, turning back to the stove, where something was definitely starting to smoke. Though perhaps not enough. Lana hopped up onto a clean section of counter, crossing her legs elegantly as she watched him work. "Tell me about these practicing sessions." "Well, the first attempt ended with me learning that you can't substitute ingredients just because they look similar." He stirred the sauce vigorously, trying to remember if it was supposed to be this thick. "The second attempt taught me that medium heat and maximum heat are not interchangeable concepts." Her laugh, rich and genuine, filled the kitchen. "And what lesson is tonight teaching you? That impressing you is worth any amount of culinary humiliation." He tasted the sauce and tried not to wince. "Though perhaps we should order backup pizza just in case." She slid off the counter and moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You don't need to impress me, Harlan. I'm already impressed by who you are." He turned in her embrace, forgetting about the simmering pot. "And who am I? A man who's willing to risk failure to show someone he cares. A man who can lose $1 billion deal with grace because his principles matter more than his profit." She reached up to touch his face. "A man who's not afraid to be vulnerable." The moment was perfect until the smoke alarm started shrieking. The sauce! Harlan spun around to find the pot bubbling over, thick black smoke rising from the burner. He grabbed for it without thinking, the hot metal searing his palm. "Damn it!" Lana moved with surprising speed, grabbing his wrist and pulling him to the sink. Cold water ran over the burn as the smoke alarm continued its piercing wail. "Hold that there," she commanded, then moved efficiently through the kitchen, turning off the burner, opening windows, fanning the smoke detector until it finally fell silent. When she returned to him, her expression was soft with concern. "Let me see." He held out his hand, the burn already beginning to blister. Her touch was gentle as she examined it. "First degree, maybe a small second-degree patch," she diagnosed. "Do you have a first aid kit?" "Master bathroom," he said, embarrassment coloring his voice. "Under the sink." She disappeared and returned moments later with supplies. As she carefully dressed the burn, Harlan watched her face, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the way she bit her lower lip as she worked. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This isn't exactly how I planned the evening." "No." She secured the bandage and looked up at him, amusement dancing in her eyes. "How did you plan it?" "I was going to serve you an amazing meal that I'd cooked myself. We'd drink wine and talk, and you'd be impressed by my hidden talents." He gestured at the disaster around them. Instead, I've managed to nearly burn down my kitchen and injure myself in the process. Lana stepped closer, sliding her hands up his chest to link behind his neck. I like this version better. You like watching me fail spectacularly. I like seeing you try something new, even knowing you might fail. I like that you wanted to do something special for me, even if it didn't go as planned. She pressed a soft kiss to his jaw. And I like taking care of you. The tenderness in her voice made his heart twist. He pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar, spicy, sweet scent of her perfume. Stay with me tonight. She tensed slightly in his arms. Harlan, not for that, he said quickly. Just stay. We'll order pizza, drink wine, and you can tell me more about how my spectacular failure has endeared me to you. She laughed against his chest, then pulled back to look at him. Pizza sounds perfect, but first, let's clean up this war zone you've created. They worked together to restore order to the kitchen, moving around each other with comfortable familiarity. Harlan found himself watching her, the graceful way she moved, the little smile that played at her lips as she hummed while working, the domestic intimacy of sharing this simple task. You're staring, she said without looking up from wiping down the counter. You're beautiful. The words came naturally, honestly. She paused, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. You're just trying to get out of cleaning duty. Is it working? She threw the dishcloth at him, hitting him squarely in the chest. Not a chance, Mr. Jace. An hour later, they sat on his leather couch, empty pizza boxes on the coffee table and a bottle of ridiculously expensive wine breathing beside them. Lana had kicked off her heels and tucked her feet under her, looking completely at home in his space. Tell me about your childhood, she said suddenly. You mentioned you were in foster care? Harlan was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. From age 7 to 18, my parents died in a car accident. Drunk driver. I bounced around the system for a while before landing with the Kingstons. Drake's family? He nodded. They were good people, strict but fair. They wanted to adopt me, but I was too angry, too determined to prove I didn't need anyone. He laughed softly. I was a nightmare teenager. Lana shifted closer, her hand finding his. What changed? Mrs. Kingston, Sarah, she never gave up on me. No matter how many times I screwed up, she just kept loving me, kept believing I could be better. He squeezed her hand. She's the one who taught me to cook, actually. Or tried to. Clearly those lessons didn't stick, Lana teased gently. Clearly not. He pulled her closer until she was nestled against his side. What about you? What was little Lana Rory like? Absolutely insufferable, she laughed. I organized protests in elementary school. Started a petition in 3rd grade because the boys got more playground time than the girls. My parents encouraged it. They believed in standing up for what's right, no matter how small the issue might seem. That explains a lot about you. She turned to face him, curious. What does it explain? Your intensity. Your passion for justice, the way you light up when you're fighting for something you believe in. He traced her cheekbone with his thumb. It's one of the things I love most about you. The word hung between them, neither acknowledging its weight but both feeling it. Lana's eyes searched his face, and whatever she found there made her breath catch. Dance with me, she said suddenly. There's no music. She stood, pulling him up with her. We don't need music. In the dimmed lights of his living room, they swayed together, her head resting on his chest, his cheek against her hair. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating their own private constellation. This is nice, she murmured. Better than my attempt at coq au vin. She laughed softly. Much better, though I appreciate the effort. They moved together in comfortable silence, the rhythm of their hearts creating all the music they needed. Harlan found himself thinking about how perfectly she fit in his arms, how natural it felt to have her in his space, in his life. "Stay," he said again, softer this time. She pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes serious. "Are you sure?" "This changes things." "Things have already changed." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I've never felt this way about anyone, Lana. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of you. You make me feel like I don't have to be perfect to be loved." Her hand came up to cup his face, thumb tracing his lower lip. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. The real you, not the corporate warrior or the society playboy. Just you, with your terrible cooking skills and your beautiful heart." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, her eyes were shining. "I'll stay," she whispered. Later, as they lay together on his couch watching the city lights, Lana's head on his chest and his fingers playing with her hair, Harlan realized something profound. All his life, he'd been trying to prove his worth through achievements, building his empire, accumulating wealth, wielding power. But here, in this quiet moment, with a woman who saw through all his defenses, he finally understood what true worth felt like. It felt like this. Like burned dinners and honest conversations, like vulnerability and trust, like the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in sync. It felt like coming home. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harlan's penthouse, casting golden light across the rumpled sheets. Lana lay curled against his side, her breathing deep and peaceful, her natural curls spread across his chest like a dark halo. 3 months had passed since their first night together, and each morning he woke beside her felt like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. His phone buzzed quietly on the nightstand. He reached for it carefully, trying not to disturb her. The message was from Drake. "Turn on the news. Now." Frowning, Harlan gently extracted himself from Lana's embrace and padded to the living room. The TV came to life with a soft hum, and his blood ran cold at the headline, scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news. Jace empire, built on fraud. Former foster sister makes shocking allegations. The volume was low, but he could hear the reporter clearly. Allegations from Amanda Foster, who claims she has evidence that Harlan Jace's initial fortune was built through illegal means. Foster, who shared a foster home with Jace in their teens, states that she has documents proving corporate espionage and fraud dating back to his earliest business ventures. "That's not true." Lana's voice came from behind him, soft but certain. He turned to find her wrapped in his silk robe, her face serious as she watched the screen. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you." She moved to his side, taking his hand. "And because I've already investigated these claims." Harlan stiffened. "What?" "Amanda Foster approached my office 2 weeks ago." Lana's fingers tightened on his. "She wanted to make a deal, said she had evidence that would destroy you, but she'd keep quiet if you paid her off." "And you didn't tell me?" His voice was tight with hurt. "I couldn't, not legally." She turned to face him fully. "But I could investigate. And I did. There's nothing there, Harlan. Whatever she thinks she has, it's not real." Before he could respond, his phone erupted with notifications. The story was spreading like wildfire across social media. His PR team was blowing up his phone, and the building's security was calling about reporters gathering in the lobby. "I have to deal with this." He ran a hand through his hair, mind already racing through damage control scenarios. "No." Lana's voice was firm. "We have to deal with this. Together." He looked at her, really looked at her. She stood there in his robe, her hair wild from sleep, no makeup, completely natural and absolutely beautiful. And she was choosing to stand with him even now. "You can't," he said softly. "You're a federal judge. You can't be caught up in a scandal." "I'm also a woman who loves you." The words fell between them like stones in still water, creating ripples that changed everything. "And I trust my judgment about who you are." Before he could process the weight of her declaration, his private elevator chimed. Drake burst in, tablet in hand, looking harried. "We need to—" He stopped short at the sight of Lana. "Oh, Judge Rory, I didn't realize." "It's fine, Drake." Lana's voice carried her courtroom authority, even in a borrowed robe. "What do we know?" Drake gathered himself quickly. "Amanda's going public with everything, claims she has documents from when you were both living with the Kingstons, says you stole corporate secrets from Mr. Kingston's office and used them to start your first company." "That's impossible," Harlan said. "I never—" "The timing's wrong," Lana interrupted. "I checked the records. The company you're accused of stealing from didn't even have those trade secrets until 2 years after you left the Kingston home." Both men stared at her. "What?" She smiled slightly. "I told you, I investigated." "We still need to respond," Drake said. "The board is calling for an emergency meeting. Our stock is already taking a hit." Harlan moved to the window, watching the city wake up to news of his supposed crimes. "What does she want?" "Money, obviously." Drake scrolled through his tablet. "She's asking for 50 million to go away quietly." "She won't get it." Harlan's voice was steel. "I won't pay blackmail for crimes I didn't commit." "There's something else." Lana's voice was hesitant. "Something I found in my investigation that doesn't make sense. There are transfers from your personal account to Amanda's dating back years, monthly payments." Harlan closed his eyes. Here it was, the moment he'd been dreading, the real secret he'd been keeping. "I've been supporting her son's medical care," he said quietly. "He has cystic fibrosis. The treatments are experimental, expensive. Insurance won't cover them." "Why?" Drake demanded. "After everything she's done." "Because I promised Sarah Kingston I would look after them." Harlan turned back to face them. "Before she died, she made me promise to take care of all her kids, even the ones who hated me." Lana moved to him, her hand finding his. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's complicated. Amanda, she had a hard time after leaving foster care. Made bad choices. The worst was getting involved with a man who hurt her repeatedly. I tried to help, but she wouldn't leave him. When she finally did, she was pregnant and alone." He squeezed Lana's hand. "I couldn't turn my back on her, not after everything Sarah did for me." "So you've been secretly supporting her all this time?" Drake's voice held new understanding. "And now she's trying to extort more money from you?" "She's desperate," Harlan said. "Her son's condition is getting worse. The new treatment protocol is more expensive than the last." "She could have just asked you for help," Lana pointed out. "Pride." Harlan's smile was sad. "It's a family trait." The elevator chimed again. This time it was Claire, Harlan's assistant, looking flustered. "Mr. Jace, the board is demanding an immediate statement. And there's a Ms. Foster in the lobby insisting on seeing you." Harlan straightened. Decision made. "Send her up." "Harlan." Drake's warning tone was clear. "It's time to end this." He turned to Lana. "Will you stay?" She kissed him softly. "Let me change first. I think this conversation requires more than your robe." 20 minutes later, Amanda Foster stepped off the elevator. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She faltered slightly at the sight of Lana. "What is she doing here?" "Judge Rory is here because she chooses to be," Harlan said quietly. "How's Tommy?" Amanda's composure cracked slightly at the mention of her son. They're saying he needs a lung transplant. The new treatment isn't working. Why didn't you come to me directly? Because I'm tired of charity, her voice cracked. I'm tired of depending on your guilt money. It was never about guilt, Amanda. Harlan moved closer to her. It was about family. Family? She laughed bitterly. You're not my family. You're the golden boy who got everything while the rest of us struggled. Is that what you really believe? His voice was gentle. That I didn't struggle. That building all this was easy. You stole your way to the top. I saw the documents in Dad's office. No, you didn't. Lana's voice cut through the tension. Those documents didn't exist then. But you know what did exist? Years of bank transfers showing Harlan supporting your son's care. Years of him keeping his promise to Sarah Kingston, even when you pushed him away. Amanda's hands shook as she pulled out a manila envelope. I have proof. You have fabricated documents that won't stand up to scrutiny, Lana said firmly. What you don't have is a brother who stopped caring about you. Tears spilled down Amanda's cheeks. Tommy's dying. The transplant. We can't afford it. I didn't know what else to do. Harlan crossed the room and did something that surprised everyone. He pulled Amanda into a hug. She resisted for a moment before collapsing against him, sobbing. Let me help, he said softly. Not as charity, but as family. Let me help Tommy. Why? She pulled back to look at him. Why would you still help me after what I did? Because Sarah Kingston taught me that family doesn't stop being family just because they hurt you. He wiped a tear from her cheek. And because I remember a girl who used to read me stories when I had nightmares about my parents' accident. That girl is still in there somewhere. Lana watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with love for this man who could show such compassion in the face of betrayal. She saw now why Sarah Kingston had believed in him so strongly. Beneath the corporate armor beat a heart capable of profound forgiveness. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Drake handled the press, releasing a statement that carefully balanced truth with privacy. Harlan's medical team was mobilized to coordinate Tommy's care. Amanda, broken and relieved, finally accepted the help she'd needed all along. That evening, after everything was settled, Harlan and Lana stood on his balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. You know, she said, leaning back against his chest, most men would have destroyed her for what she tried to do. Most men didn't have Sarah Kingston teach them about grace. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Besides, I had something to prove. To whom? To you. He turned her in his arms. You said you loved me this morning. Her smile was radiant. I did. Why? Because you're a man who keeps his promises even when it hurts, because you choose compassion over vengeance, because you're nothing like your reputation suggests and everything I could ever want. She traced his jaw with her fingers. Because you make me believe in the kind of love that changes people for the better. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you too, more than I thought possible. The city lights began to twinkle around them, but neither noticed. They were lost in each other, in the profound understanding that sometimes the darkest shadows reveal the brightest truths about the heart. Later that night, as they lay tangled in his sheets, Harlan thought about how close he'd come to losing everything. Not his money or his reputation, those could be rebuilt. But this woman in his arms, who had chosen to stand beside him, who had seen the truth of him even when presented with damning lies, she was irreplaceable. What are you thinking about? She murmured sleepily. About how lucky I am. He pulled her closer. About how some things are worth more than all the wealth in the world. She smiled against his chest. Now you're just getting sappy. You bring it out in me. He kissed her hair. Thank you for believing in me. Always, she whispered, and in that word was a promise as binding as any he'd ever made to Sarah Kingston. Outside, the city that never sleeps continued its endless dance of light and shadow, but in the sanctuary of their embrace, everything was clear and bright and true. Chapter 6. Trial by Fire. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Lana reviewed the case files spread across her desk. The Cayman Industries corruption trial had consumed her life for the past 2 weeks, and the pressure was mounting. The defendant, Senator Michael Harrison, had deep connections and even deeper pockets, but the evidence of his involvement in the money laundering scheme was undeniable. Her phone buzzed, another blocked number, the 4th today. She ignored it, just as she'd ignored the others, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. The door to her chambers opened, and Zara rushed in, her face pale. "Judge Rory, you need to see this." She handed Lana a plain brown envelope. Inside were photos, surveillance shots of Lana leaving her apartment, getting coffee, meeting her parents for dinner. The message was clear. Someone was watching. "Have you told Mr. Jace?" Zara asked quietly. "No." Lana's voice was firm. "And you won't either. Harlan has enough to deal with after the Amanda situation. He doesn't need to worry about this." Lightning flashed outside her window, illuminating the gathering storm clouds. The weather matched her mood, dark and threatening, with worse to come. A knock on her door made both women jump. It was Marcus, her senior clerk. "Judge Rory, Senator Harrison's lawyer is requesting a private meeting to discuss a potential plea deal." Lana's spine stiffened. "In my chambers?" "He's waiting in conference room B." "No." She stood, gathering the photos and slipping them into her desk drawer. "All communications go through proper channels, no private meetings." Marcus nodded, relief evident on his face. "I'll tell him you declined." After he left, Zara lingered. "Maybe you should at least tell security about the photos." "They're just trying to intimidate me." Lana straightened her robe. "I won't give them the satisfaction of showing fear." But later that evening, as she walked to her car in the underground parking garage, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The storm had arrived in full force, rain pounding against the concrete structure, thunder echoing off the walls. A figure stepped out from behind a pillar, and her heart stopped, but it was only Harlan, looking devastating in a charcoal suit, his hair slightly damp from the rain. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, relief and irritation warring in her voice. "Funny thing," he said, moving closer. "I got an interesting call from Zara this afternoon." Lana made a mental note to have a serious talk with her clerk about loyalty. "I told her not to tell you. She was worried about you." His eyes were intense as they searched her face. "As am I. Why didn't you tell me about the threats?" "Because I'm handling it." "Like you're handling the surveillance photos?" When she looked surprised, he continued, "Did you really think I wouldn't have people watching out for you during this trial?" Anger flared in her chest. "I don't need your protection, Harlan. I'm not some damsel in distress." "No, you're a federal judge handling a high-profile corruption case with ties to organized crime." His voice rose slightly. "A judge who happens to be the woman I love, who's too stubborn to admit she might be in danger." A crash of thunder punctuated his words. They stood facing each other in the dim garage, the storm raging outside, matching the tension between them. "I can't compromise my integrity," she said finally. "Not even for you, if anyone found out you were providing private security." To hell with appearances. He closed the distance between them, his hands gripping her arms. "Your life is more important than optics." Lightning flashed, illuminating the raw fear in his eyes. She realized suddenly that this wasn't about control or protection. It was about love and terror of losing her. "Harlan." She reached up to touch his face, but he pulled away. "No, you need to listen." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've spent my life taking what I want, controlling everything around me. But I can't control this. I can't control the fact that loving you has made me vulnerable in ways I never imagined possible. And I sure as hell can't control my need to keep you safe." The intensity of his words, the passion in his voice, broke something open inside her. She grabbed his tie and pulled him down to her, crushing her lips against his. The kiss was nothing like their previous ones. This was raw, desperate, fueled by fear and need and something deeper. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying her careful style as he backed her against her car. She gasped as the cold metal met her back, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until she was dizzy with want. Thunder crashed overhead, but neither of them noticed. Her hands slid under his jacket, feeling the heat of him through his shirt. His mouth left hers to trail fire down her neck, and she arched into him, all thoughts of propriety forgotten. "We can't," she gasped, even as her body contradicted her words. "Not here." He pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged. "Come home with me." "I have early hearings. Please." The word was raw, honest. "I need to know you're safe tonight." She should say no, should maintain her independence, her professional distance. But the storm was howling outside, and his eyes were dark with need and fear, and suddenly all her carefully constructed walls seemed meaningless. "Yes," she whispered. The ride to his penthouse was charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. His hand rested on her thigh as he drove, a possessive touch that made her skin burn. She watched his profile, illuminated by flashes of lightning, the strong jaw clenched with tension, the powerful shoulders rigid under his suit. When they reached his building, the storm was at its peak. They ran from the car to the private elevator, getting soaked in the process. Her silk blouse clung to her skin, and his white shirt had gone nearly transparent. The elevator doors closed, and suddenly they were on each other again. He pressed her against the mirrored wall, his mouth hot and demanding on hers. She wrapped her legs around his waist as he lifted her, and he groaned into her neck. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" he murmured against her skin. "How crazy you make me." "Show me," she challenged, and felt him harden against her. The elevator chimed, and he carried her into the penthouse without breaking their connection. Lightning flashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting dramatic shadows across their entangled forms. He set her down in the middle of his living room, both of them breathing heavily. Rain pounded against the windows as they stared at each other, the air thick with anticipation. Slowly, deliberately, Lana began unbuttoning her ruined blouse. Harlan's eyes followed her movements, his gaze hot enough to burn. When the silk fell away, revealing black lace underneath, his breath caught audibly. "Your turn," she said softly. He shrugged off his jacket, then attacked his tie with slightly shaking hands. She moved closer to help, her fingers brushing his as they worked together to remove the silk barrier. His shirt followed, revealing the sculpted chest she'd admired so many times before. Thunder boomed directly overhead as their bare skin finally met. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, trailing down her spine, cupping her breasts through the lace. She explored him just as thoroughly, memorizing the feel of his muscles under her fingers, the way he shuddered when she scraped her nails lightly down his back. "You're so beautiful," he breathed, watching as she reached behind to unhook her bra. "So incredibly beautiful." The lace fell away, and his expression became almost reverent. Lightning illuminated her bare skin, creating patterns of light and shadow that made her look like a goddess in his arms. He could hear her heart racing, matching the thunder of his own pulse. When she pressed against him skin to skin, the contact was electric. Her fingers traced the scars on his chest, remnants of his difficult childhood, with infinite tenderness. "I love you," she whispered against his heart. All of you. The scars, the strength, the vulnerability. Everything. He captured her mouth in a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, pouring all his emotions into the connection. They moved together toward his bedroom, leaving a trail of remaining clothing in their wake. The storm provided a dramatic backdrop to their lovemaking. Flashes of lightning illuminating their entangled forms, thunder punctuating their gasps and moans. It was different from their previous encounters, more intense, more desperate, as if the danger they'd faced had stripped away all pretense and hesitation. Afterward, they lay tangled in his sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. The storm was beginning to fade, but its energy still hummed in their veins. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for trying to control the situation. The thought of losing you." She propped herself up to look at him. "I understand the fear. But you have to understand something too. I can't compromise who I am or what I believe in. Not even for you. I know." He tucked a wild curl behind her ear. "It's one of the reasons I love you so much. Your integrity, your strength. I just wish those qualities didn't put you in danger." "Life puts us in danger," she said wisely. "Love makes us vulnerable, but it also makes us stronger." He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her skin. "Promise me something?" "What?" "Promise you'll let me love you. Let me worry about you. Let me try to protect you, even when you don't think you need it." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Only if you promise something in return." "Anything. Promise you'll trust me to know my own limits, to make my own choices, to be strong enough to face whatever comes." He kissed her softly. "I promise." They sealed their promises with gentle touches and whispered words of love, the storm outside finally fading to a gentle rain. As Lana drifted off to sleep in his arms, Harlan remained awake, watching over her. He knew there would be more storms to weather, both literal and metaphorical. Senator Harrison and his allies wouldn't give up easily. The threats might escalate, but he also knew that trying to control everything would only push her away. So he made another silent promise, to be worthy of her trust, to support her strength rather than try to protect her from every danger, to love her the way she deserved to be loved, not as a possession to be guarded, but as an equal to be cherished. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against the windows, a lullaby for their newfound understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, in the aftermath of the storm, they had found their balance, between protection and independence, between passion and tenderness, between the need to control and the courage to trust. And in that balance, they had found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to weather any storm. Chapter 7. Breaking Point. The headline screamed across the New York Times front page, "Federal Judge's Romance with Business Tycoon Raises Ethics Concerns." Lana stared at the paper on her desk, her fingers tracing the grainy photo of her and Harlan leaving the opera last week. They looked happy, elegant, in love, everything they weren't supposed to be, according to the article. Her phone buzzed, another message from Harlan. She hadn't answered his calls since the story broke yesterday. Each missed call felt like a physical pain, but she knew she needed clarity before she could face him. Zara appeared in her doorway, face drawn with concern. "The Judicial Conduct Committee is requesting an immediate meeting." Of course they were. The article had raised questions about every case involving Harlan's business interests that had come before her court. Never mind that she'd recused herself from anything connected to him since their relationship began. Never mind that her record was spotless. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. She could still feel the warmth of his skin from their last morning together, just 2 days ago. They'd woken tangled in his sheets, his hands tracing lazy patterns on her back as the sun painted their skin gold. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? The committee meeting was exactly as brutal as she'd expected. 5 senior judges, all wearing expressions of grave concern, questioning every decision she'd made since meeting Harlan. Judge Rory, Judge Hamilton, the committee chair, spoke with careful precision. While there's no explicit rule against relationships between judges and business leaders, the appearance of impropriety— "With all due respect," Lana interrupted, her spine straight as steel, "I have never allowed my personal life to influence my judicial decisions. Every case involving Mr. Jace's interests has been reassigned since our relationship began." "The Tech Dynamics case," another committee member began, "was decided against Mr. Jace's interests, as the law required." Her voice carried the authority that had made her the youngest federal judge in the circuit. My record speaks for itself. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Public trust in the judiciary was essential, and even the appearance of bias could damage that trust. When she returned to her chambers, there was a massive bouquet of white roses on her desk, her favorites. The card read simply, "Let me fight this with you." H. Her heart twisted. That was exactly what she couldn't allow. The drive to his penthouse that evening was the longest of her life. The security guard's sympathetic smile told her he'd seen the papers too. Everyone had seen them. Their private happiness had become public property, dissected and judged by strangers. Harlan opened the door before she could knock. He looked exhausted, his usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through his hair repeatedly. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly. "I needed to think." She moved past him into the apartment, needing space between them to stay strong. "And what did you decide?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the fear underneath. "I can't do this anymore." The words felt like glass in her throat. "We can't do this." He was quiet for a long moment. Because of a newspaper article? Because of what it represents? She turned to face him, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. "My integrity as a judge isn't just about actual bias. It's about the appearance of bias. The public's trust in the system is essential. So we'll be more discreet. I'll sell any companies with cases pending in your court. We'll find a way." "It's not that simple." She wrapped her arms around herself, resisting the urge to go to him. "Every decision I make will be questioned. Every ruling will be seen through the lens of our relationship. And that matters more than us." There was an edge to his voice now. "More than what we have. You know it does." Tears threatened, but she held them back. "My work. It's not just a job, Harlan. It's my calling. It's who I am. And I'm just an inconvenient complication?" He moved closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. "Tell me you don't love me. Tell me what we have isn't worth fighting for." "Of course I love you." The words burst out before she could stop them. "That's what makes this so hard. But love isn't always enough." He reached for her, but she stepped back. If he touched her now, her resolve would crumble. "Don't." Her voice cracked. "Please don't make this harder. It doesn't have to be hard at all." Frustration colored his tone. "We're both adults. We can handle this. Like you handled the Tech Dynamics case, like you handled Amanda's attempted blackmail." She saw him flinch and pressed on. "Our lives are too intertwined with the law, with business, with power. There will always be conflicts. So we'll deal with them as they come." He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up further. "You're asking me to give up the best thing that's ever happened to me because of what other people might think. I'm asking you to understand that some things are bigger than us." She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "The integrity of the justice system has to be protected. And what about protecting us?" His voice was raw with emotion. What about everything we've built together? She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, remembering all the nights they'd stood here together, planning their future. Sometimes the right decision is the hardest one. This isn't right. He was behind her now, close enough that she could feel his warmth. This is fear. This is letting them win. No. She turned to face him, tears finally spilling over. This is me choosing my duty over my heart. This is me being who I've always been, someone who believes in justice above all else. Even above love, especially above love. She reached up to touch his face, allowing herself one last moment of weakness. Because love can blind us to what's right. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. Stay, we'll figure this out together. For a moment she wavered. The look in his eyes, the familiar feel of his skin under her fingers. It would be so easy to give in, to believe they could overcome anything. But then she thought of the committee meeting, of the whispers in the courthouse corridors, of every decision she would make being scrutinized for bias. She thought of the principles she'd built her life around, the oath she'd taken to uphold justice without fear or favor. I have to go. She pulled her hand away, the loss of contact physical pain. Lana, please, don't. She moved toward the door, each step an agony. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't tell me we'll find a way. Just let me go. He didn't try to stop her, and somehow that was worse than if he had. She made it to the elevator before the sobs started, her body shaking with the force of her grief. The next week passed in a blur of motions and hearings, her work the only thing keeping her sane. She threw herself into cases, staying late at the office, trying to fill the void with legal precedents and constitutional arguments. But everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of him. The coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation. The park where they'd walked for hours, debating legal theory and sharing dreams. The courthouse steps where he'd waited for her after difficult cases just to make sure she was okay. The media circus continued, but she refused to comment. Let them speculate about why the relationship ended. Let them paint her as cold, calculating, choosing career over love. They couldn't possibly understand the cost of her choice. Late one night, as she sat in her chambers reviewing case files, Zara brought her a package. Inside was a single white rose and a note. I respect your decision, but know that I'll wait, for as long as it takes. -H. She traced his handwriting with trembling fingers, remembering how he used to leave her notes in the morning when he had early meetings. Little things like, you're beautiful when you sleep, or missing you already. The rose's perfume filled her office, and suddenly she couldn't breathe. She grabbed her coat and fled to the roof garden, their special place where they used to meet for lunch when their schedules allowed. The night air was cool on her tear-stained face as she looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Harlan was probably in his office too, working late, trying to forget. Or maybe he was at home, staring at the side of the bed that still smelled like her perfume. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. Sometimes the hardest choices show us who we really are. But who was she really? The principled judge who sacrificed love for duty? Or the woman who let fear of public opinion destroy the best thing in her life? The answer, she realized, wasn't simple. She was both, and neither. She was someone trying to navigate between heart and duty, between love and principle, between what she wanted and what she believed was right. As she stood there under the stars, she remembered something Harlan had said to her once. The measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they handle the consequences of their choices. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it, had to prove that the sacrifice meant something, had to be worthy of both the position she'd fought to protect and the love she'd had to let go. The city lights blurred through her tears, but she stood straight and tall. She was Lana Rory, federal judge, daughter of civil rights activists, woman of principle. And if her heart was broken, well, some prices were worth paying for justice, even if the cost was everything she'd ever wanted. Chapter 8. The Truth Emerges. 3 weeks of silence felt like an eternity. Lana immersed herself in work, taking on extra cases, staying late at the courthouse until Zara practically forced her to go home. But home felt empty now, haunted by memories of shared laughter and tender moments. The morning brought another stack of case files to her chambers, but one manila envelope stood out from the rest. It wasn't part of any current case, and the handwriting on the label was unfamiliar. Inside, she found documentation about a case from 15 years ago, a domestic abuse situation involving one of Harlan's former foster siblings, police reports, hospital records, and finally, a series of financial transactions that made her breath catch. "Judge Rory," Zara's voice interrupted her concentration. "Your 10 a.m. appointment is here." "I don't have any appointments this morning. It's Mrs. Kingston, Sarah Kingston's sister." Lana's heart skipped. She hadn't seen Margaret Kingston since the funeral 5 years ago, but she remembered the woman's kind eyes and fierce loyalty to her foster children. "Send her in." Margaret Kingston had aged gracefully, her silver hair elegantly styled, her posture still ramrod straight despite her years. She carried a wooden box under her arm. "Judge Rory," she said warmly, "thank you for seeing me without notice. Please, call me Lana." She gestured to a chair. "What brings you here?" Margaret placed the box on the desk between them. "Sarah left this for Harlan, but she made me promise not to give it to him until the right moment. I think that moment is now." "I don't understand." Lana looked at the box, then back at Margaret. "Harlan and we're not together anymore." "I know." Margaret's smile was knowing. "I also know why. You're a woman of principle, just like Sarah was. That's why I'm here." She opened the box, revealing stacks of letters, photos, and a leather-bound journal. Sarah kept everything, every story, every secret, every moment of triumph and pain from her years fostering troubled children. But Harlan's story, that was special. She pulled out a photograph. A teenage Harlan, thin and angry-looking, standing beside a much younger Jason, another foster child. This was taken the day before everything changed. What happened? Lana found herself drawn into the story despite her reservations. Jason's father found him. The man was violent, abusive. He had no legal right to contact Jason, but he showed up at school one day. Margaret's voice grew soft with memory. Harlan was 17, already working part-time at Robert's office. He had access to certain documents. Understanding dawned. "The transactions I found, he used insider information to blackmail Jason's father. He did what he had to do to protect his brother." Margaret's eyes were fierce. The man had broken Jason's arm twice before he went into foster care. Harlan made sure he never came near the boy again. "That's illegal." But Lana's voice lacked conviction. "Yes, and if you'd been the judge on that case, you would have had to rule against him. But would that have made it wrong?" Lana sat back, considering. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to understand who Harlan really is. Not the corporate raider, not the billionaire playboy, but the boy who broke the law to protect someone weaker than himself." Margaret pulled out another photo. Harlan at his college graduation with Sarah beaming beside him. The boy who learned that sometimes justice and the law aren't exactly the same thing. "I can't compromise my principles," Lana said softly. "No one's asking you to. But perhaps your principles need to expand enough to recognize that good people sometimes make difficult choices for the right reasons." Margaret stood, leaving the box on the desk. "Read Sarah's journal. Understand the man you love. Then decide if protecting the appearance of propriety is worth sacrificing something real and precious." After she left, Lana sat for a long time staring at the box. Finally, with hands that trembled slightly, she opened Sarah Kingston's journal. The words drew her in immediately. Today, Harlan smiled for the first time since coming to us. Not his usual sarcastic smirk, but a real smile. He was helping Jason with math homework, showing more patience than I've ever seen from him. There's such goodness in this angry boy, if only he'll let himself show it. Hours passed as Lana read about Harlan's transformation from a wounded, defensive teenager into a young man determined to succeed. She read about his nightmares, his fear of abandonment, his fierce protection of the younger foster children. One entry particularly caught her attention. Harlan came to me today, terrified. He confessed what he'd done to keep Jason safe, expected me to turn him in, to throw him out. Instead, I held him while he cried for the first time since his parents died. He did wrong for the right reasons. The mark of a heart that understands justice goes deeper than laws. The sun was setting when Lana finally closed the journal. Her phone showed missed calls from her clerk, her mother, even the chief judge. But only one message mattered. A text from Drake. He's not doing well. Neither are you. Fix this. She found herself driving to Harlan's penthouse without conscious decision. The security guard took one look at her face and waved her up without checking his list. When the elevator doors opened, she heard piano music. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece they'd heard at their first concert together. Harlan sat at the grand piano, his fingers moving over the keys with the same grace he brought to everything. He didn't stop playing when she entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly. She moved to stand behind him, watching his hands dance across the ivory. "I didn't know you could play," she said softly when the piece ended. Sarah insisted all her foster kids learn an instrument, said it was good for the soul. He still hadn't turned to look at her. "Why are you here, Lana?" "Because I understand now." She placed Sarah's journal on the piano. "About Jason. About what you did to protect him." His hands stilled on the keys. "Margaret gave you the box." "Yes!" She moved to sit beside him on the bench, their shoulders touching slightly. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference?" Now he did look at her, his eyes haunted. "Would knowing I broke the law, even for a good reason, have changed your mind about us?" "It changes how I understand you." She touched his face gently. "It helps me see that sometimes doing the right thing means making impossible choices." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too." She smiled slightly. "The courthouse roof garden is lonely without you. Drake says I've been impossible to work with." His hand found hers on the piano keys. "Apparently I'm even more ruthless when I'm heartbroken." "We can't go back to how things were," she said carefully. "The public scrutiny won't go away." "I know." He intertwined their fingers. "But maybe we can find a new way forward, one that honors both your principles and our love." "How?" "I've been thinking about that." He turned to face her fully. "What if I step back from active management of my companies, create a blind trust for all my business interests? That would remove any possibility of conflict with your cases." She blinked in surprise. "You'd do that?" "Lana, I'd give up everything I own if it meant having you back in my life." His voice was raw with honesty. "These past weeks, I've realized that all my success, all my wealth, means nothing without you to share it with." "But your work is part of who you are," she protested. "No," he smiled slightly. "My work was part of who I was, the angry foster kid determined to prove his worth through success. But you've helped me see I'm more than that. Just like Sarah did." She looked at their joined hands on the piano keys, thinking about Sarah's words in the journal, about justice versus law, about the choices good people make, about the difference between appearing right and being right. "I can't promise it will be easy," she said finally. "People will still talk." "Let them." He brought their joined hands to his lips. "All that matters is that we face it together." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I love you. Even when I was trying to be noble and sacrifice our happiness for principle, I never stopped loving you." "I know." His free hand came up to cup her face. "Just like I never stopped loving you. Never stopped believing we'd find our way back to each other." When their lips met, it felt like coming home. All the pain and loneliness of their separation melted away, replaced by the simple rightness of being together. Later, as they lay tangled in his sheets, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, Lana thought about Sarah Kingston's words. "The mark of a heart that understands justice goes deeper than laws." Perhaps that was the real lesson here, that true justice required understanding the complex hearts of people, not just the black and white letters of the law. That love, when it was real and true, deserved its own kind of justice. "What are you thinking about?" Harlan murmured into her hair. "About Sarah, about how she would have handled all this." He was quiet for a moment. "She would have told us both to stop being stubborn and figure it out together." Lana laughed softly. "She sounds wise." She was. His arms tightened around her. "She taught me that family isn't about blood or law. It's about love and choice and standing by people even when it's hard. Like you did with Jason. Like I'll always do for the people I love." He tilted her face up to his. "Including you if you'll let me." She kissed him softly. "I'll let you. As long as you remember that I don't need protecting, I need partnering." "Deal." His smile was tender. "Partners in love, life, and justice." "Partners in everything," she agreed, settling back against his chest. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, but in the sanctuary of their embrace, everything was clear and bright and true. They had found their way through the darkness of separation to a deeper understanding of themselves, of each other, and of the complex dance between justice and love. Sometimes the truth that emerges from darkness is stronger than any truth that existed in the light. Sometimes the heart has to break to grow larger, and sometimes two people have to lose each other to truly find their way back home. Chapter 9. Public Scrutiny. The Metropolitan Museum's annual charity gala was in full swing, the marble halls echoing with music and conversation. Harlan adjusted his bow tie as he watched Lana descend the grand staircase. She wore a deep crimson gown that seemed to float around her, her natural curls styled in an elegant updo that emphasized her graceful neck. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything else faded away. 2 months had passed since their reconciliation, and every moment together felt more precious for having almost lost it. "She looks stunning," Drake murmured beside him, "and Maxwell Roberts is about to make his move." Harlan's jaw tightened as he watched his business rival approach Lana. Maxwell Roberts had been vocal in his criticism of their relationship, using his media connections to question both Harlan's business practices and Lana's judicial integrity. "Trust her," Drake reminded him quietly. Lana's voice carried clearly across the marble floor as she addressed Roberts. "Mr. Roberts, how kind of you to express such concern for the integrity of our judicial system. Perhaps you'd like to discuss the 3 pending cases against your companies for worker safety violations." Roberts faltered, his practiced smile slipping. "Judge Rory, I merely meant to suggest that certain relationships might create the appearance of..." "The appearance of what exactly?" Harlan's voice was silk over steel as he joined them. "Of 2 people refusing to let others dictate their happiness?" He slipped his arm around Lana's waist, feeling her lean into him slightly. The gesture was both intimate and defiant, a clear message to everyone watching. "Mr. Jace." Roberts's tone was cold. I was just expressing my concern about potential conflicts of interest." "How thoughtful." Lana's smile was razor-sharp. "Though I notice your concern only emerged after Harlan's company outbid yours for the Stewart contract." A crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with barely concealed interest. Harlan could see camera phones discreetly recording, knew this would be all over social media within hours. "You're proving my point," Robert said smugly. "Your personal relationship clearly influences your view of business matters." "No," Lana replied calmly. "My view of business matters is influenced by facts, evidence, and the law. Just as my view of you is influenced by your attempt to use me to attack someone I love." The word love rang out in the sudden silence. Harlan's arm tightened around her waist as he saw photographers moving in. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the crowd directly, "since you seem so interested in our personal lives, let me be clear. Yes, I love this extraordinary woman. Yes, she maintains her complete judicial independence. And yes, anyone who attempts to use our relationship to undermine either of us will face consequences." Lana turned to face him, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and affection. "Are you threatening the entire New York social elite? Just reminding them that happiness is worth fighting for?" He brushed a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "Dance with me." As he led her to the dance floor, the crowd parted, whispers following in their wake. The orchestra began a waltz, and they moved together with practiced grace. "That was quite a declaration," she murmured as they danced. "Too much." "Perfect." She smiled up at him. "Though Roberts looked like he might have a stroke. He'll get over it." Harlan guided her through a turn. "Or he won't. I don't particularly care. You know this will be all over the papers tomorrow." "Good." His hand spread possessively across her back. "Let them see what real love looks like. Let them see that we won't be intimidated or separated by their gossip and schemes." The music shifted to a slower tempo, and Lana moved closer, her head resting on his shoulder. Her perfume enveloped him, the same spicy, exotic scent that had first captivated him at their first meeting. "I'm proud of us," she said softly, "for finding a way to be together without compromising who we are. I'm proud of you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "For being strong enough to choose love without sacrificing your principles." The evening progressed like a dream. They danced, they mingled, they faced down critics together. When Roberts tried to approach them again, Drake smoothly intercepted him with a pointed reminder about certain questionable tax practices his firm had uncovered. As midnight approached, Lana's parents joined them on the terrace. Ruby Rory looked elegant in midnight blue, while Marcus wore his distinction like a crown. "Quite a show you two put on," Ruby said with a smile. "Someone had to say it," Harlan replied, his arm still around Lana's waist. "And you chose the most public venue possible." Marcus's tone was approving. "Making it impossible for them to twist the narrative." "I learned from the best," Lana smiled at her father. "You always said if you're going to take a stand, make sure everyone sees you standing." Ruby reached out to touch Harlan's arm. "Thank you for loving our daughter enough to fight for her, even when it meant facing public criticism." "Loving her is the easiest thing I've ever done," he said simply. "Everything else is just noise." Later that night, as they rode the elevator to his penthouse, Lana kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. "I think my feet might never recover." "Worth it?" He pulled her close, nuzzling her neck. She tilted her head to give him better access. "Definitely worth it. Though I suspect tomorrow's news coverage will be interesting." "Let them talk." His hands traced the bare skin exposed by her backless gown. "We've given them something worth talking about." She turned in his arms, her fingers working at his bow tie. "You know what I realized tonight?" "What's that?" He was distracted by the way the crimson silk clung to her curves. "That I've never been prouder to be yours." She slid the tie free, then started on his shirt buttons. "That watching you stand up for us, for me, made me fall in love with you all over again." The elevator doors opened to his penthouse, but they barely noticed. They were lost in each other, in the heady combination of public triumph and private passion. Harlan lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom. The city lights sparkled through the windows, creating patterns across her skin as he slowly unzipped her gown. "You're so beautiful," he breathed, watching the silk slide away to reveal smooth, dark skin. So incredibly beautiful. Her hands weren't idle, pushing his jacket off his shoulders, unbuttoning his shirt with practiced ease. When their bare skin finally met, it felt like coming home. They made love with a combination of tenderness and passion, celebration and possession. Every touch was a declaration, every kiss a promise. The world outside might judge them, might try to tear them apart, but in this moment they were invincible. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Lana traced patterns on his chest. "Do you ever regret it, choosing us over an easier path?" "Never." He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "The easy path rarely leads to anything worth having." She propped herself up on an elbow to look at him. The moonlight silvered her skin, making her look otherworldly. "I love you, Harlan Jace, with all your complexity, all your strength, all your beautiful contradictions." "And I love you, Lana Rory." He pulled her down for a kiss. "My fierce, principled, extraordinary woman, morning would bring new challenges. There would be news articles to face, comments to ignore, battles to fight. But they would face it all together, stronger for having chosen love over fear, truth over appearance, each other over everything else. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the whispers or the criticism or the public scrutiny, but the simple truth of two hearts beating in sync, two lives intertwined, two souls who had found their way home to each other. Chapter 10. The Choice. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, bearing the official seal of the United States Supreme Court. Lana's hands trembled as she opened it, though she already knew what it contained. The whispers had been circulating for weeks. Justice Reynolds was retiring, and her name was on the short list for his replacement. "Your Honor?" Zara's voice was tentative. "The Chief Justice is on line 1. Of course he was. This carefully orchestrated dance had been months in the making. The informal discussions, the discreet vetting, the political maneuvering, all leading to this moment. The conversation was brief but momentous. By the time she hung up, Lana's world had shifted on its axis. She was being formally nominated for the Supreme Court of the United States. Her first instinct was to call Harlan, but she hesitated. This nomination would mean moving to Washington, D.C., leaving New York, leaving him. The thought made her heart constrict. Instead of calling, she walked to their spot, the courthouse roof garden, where they'd shared so many lunches and private moments. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the carefully tended planters. "I thought I'd find you here." She turned to find Harlan watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Of course he knew. He had connections everywhere. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About the nomination." "Since this morning." He moved to join her at the railing. "About the possibility? About 3 months?" "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't my place." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "This is your moment, your achievement. I didn't want to influence your decision in any way." She looked up at him, this man who had learned to balance his need to protect with her need for independence. "It would mean moving to D.C. "I know." His smile was gentle. "Good thing I've already started looking at properties there." "What?" She pulled back slightly to study his face. "Lana, Did you really think I wouldn't have a plan? He drew her closer. My company's East Coast operations are due for expansion. DC is a logical choice for a new headquarters. You can't uproot your entire life for me. I'm not. His voice was firm. I'm choosing to grow my life alongside yours. There's a difference. Tears pricked at her eyes. When did you become so wise? Somewhere between falling in love with you and learning that real strength is in supporting, not controlling. He wiped a tear from her cheek. Now, are you going to tell me about the nomination? They spent the next hour on that rooftop, discussing the implications, the challenges, the possibilities. Harlan listened as she talked about her vision for the court, her hopes for making a difference on a national scale. You're magnificent when you're passionate, he said softly, when she finally paused for breath. The way your eyes light up, the way your whole being radiates purpose, it's breathtaking. She touched his face gently. You make me feel like anything is possible. Everything is possible. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. We've proven that, haven't we? That evening, they celebrated at their favorite Italian restaurant in the village, the same place they'd reconnected after their separation. Harlan had reserved the entire back garden, filling it with white roses and candlelight. You didn't have to do all this, she said, as they sat beneath twinkling string lights. Of course I did. He poured her favorite wine. It's not every day my woman gets nominated for the Supreme Court. She smiled at his proud tone. Your woman? My partner. He corrected himself with a grin. My inspiration. My future. The wine was perfect. The food exquisite. But what Lana would remember most about that night was the way Harlan looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. Dance with me, he said after dinner, holding out his hand. There's no music. On cue, soft violin music began to play. Of course, he'd thought of everything. They swayed together under the stars, her head on his chest, his cheek against her hair. The spring night was perfect. Warm enough to be comfortable, cool enough to justify holding each other close. I've been thinking, he murmured. Dangerous. He chuckled. I'm serious. All this talk about moving to DC, starting a new chapter, it made me realize something. She pulled back slightly to look at him. What's that? That I don't want to just move with you. I want to move towards something with you. His hands tightened on her waist. I want forever, Lana. Her heart stopped. Harlan. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. A perfect oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds set in platinum. I had it made for you, he said softly. The sapphire is from my mother's wedding ring, the only thing I have left from my parents. The setting is new, designed to be both elegant and practical enough to wear in court. Tears blurred her vision as he went down on one knee. Lana Rory, you changed my life. You taught me that true strength is in vulnerability, that real power is in partnership, that love is worth any sacrifice. You make me want to be better, to do better, to love better. His voice was thick with emotion. Will you marry me? She pulled him to his feet, framing his face with her hands. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The kiss that followed was tender and passionate, full of promise and possibility. When they finally parted, he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Perfect fit, she whispered, like us. Later that night, in the sanctuary of his penthouse, they made love with a new intensity. Each touch was a promise, each kiss a declaration. Moonlight painted their skin as they moved together, celebrating their love and their future. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Lana admired how the ring caught the city lights. What are you thinking? Harlan asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. That I've never been happier. She turned to face him. That somehow against all odds, we found our way to this perfect moment. Not against all odds. He pulled her closer. Because of who we are. Because we were brave enough to choose love, again and again. She kissed him softly. When did you become such a romantic? When I met a woman who made me believe in something bigger than success. His smile was tender. When I realized that all my achievements meant nothing without someone to share them with. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the city twinkling beyond the windows like a field of earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, press conferences, congratulations, preparations for the confirmation hearings. But tonight was just for them, for this moment of perfect understanding and absolute love. In her dreams, Lana saw their future unfolding, a life in D.C., making a difference on the highest court in the land, with Harlan by her side. She saw their love growing stronger with each challenge faced together, each victory shared, each obstacle overcome. And in his dreams, Harlan saw the lonely empire he'd built transforming into something meaningful. A foundation for their shared future, a platform for positive change, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear. Together, they dreamed of possibilities, of promises, of a love strong enough to bridge any distance and face any challenge. Because in the end, that's what their story was about. Not just success or power or position, but the courage to choose each other, every day, in every way. Forever. Chapter 11. Understanding. The small Italian pizzeria in the village hadn't changed. The checkered tablecloths, the flickering candles in wine bottles, the faded photographs of Rome on the walls. Everything was exactly as it had been the night of Harlan's disastrous cooking attempt. But Lana felt different as she pushed open the door, the bell chiming softly above her. 2 weeks had passed since his proposal, since the Supreme Court nomination announcement. 2 weeks of silence, of soul-searching, of realizing that their greatest obstacle wasn't external pressure or public opinion. It was their own fears. He was already there, sitting at their usual corner table. The sight of him made her heart twist. He'd lost weight, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "You came," he said softly, as she slid into the seat across from him. "You knew I would." She managed a small smile. "This is our place, after all, where everything began." He nodded, remembering that first night when his failed cooking attempt had led them here, when they'd first started to see past each other's carefully constructed facades. The waiter appeared with a bottle of their favorite wine, already opened to breathe. Of course, Harlan had remembered even that detail. "I've been thinking," they both said simultaneously, then laughed, breaking some of the tension. "Ladies first," Harlan offered, pouring the wine. Lana took a sip, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about fear, about how it makes us do things that hurt the people we love most. Like running away to D.C. without discussing it." His voice was gentle, without accusation. "Like trying to control everything to prevent loss." She met his eyes. "We're both guilty of letting our fears drive us." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers where her engagement ring should have been. "Tell me your fears, Lana." "All of them." The touch sent electricity through her veins. "I'm afraid of losing myself in you, of becoming just Harlan Jace's wife instead of my own person, of having my achievements overshadowed by our relationship." "And I'm afraid of not being enough," he admitted, "of you realizing that I'm still that broken foster kid underneath all the success, of you choosing your career over me, just like everyone else chose something else over me." The honesty between them was raw, painful but necessary. The waiter appeared with their usual order, a margarita pizza with extra basil, but neither moved to eat. "I would never choose my career over you," Lana said softly. "But I need you to understand that my career is part of who I am. It's not just ambition, it's purpose." "I know." He smiled slightly. "It's one of the things I love most about you. Your passion for justice, your dedication to making a difference. I would never want you to be less than who you are." "Then why try to arrange everything in DC without telling me? Why make all those plans on your own?" He was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "Because it was easier than facing the possibility that you might not want me to come with you, that you might see this as your chance to break free." The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. She stood up, moving around the table to sit beside him in the booth. "Look at me, Harlan." When he met her eyes, she saw all his childhood abandonment issues, all his adult trust issues laid bare. "I love you," she said firmly. "Not your money, not your power, not what you can do for me. Just you. The man who tries to cook for me and fails spectacularly. The man who plays piano when he's troubled. The man who loves so deeply he's willing to rebuild his entire life for me." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "I'm sorry. For trying to control things. For not trusting you enough to make plans together. And I'm sorry for running away instead of talking to you." She pulled back to look at him. "We're both pretty messed up, aren't we?" His laugh was soft but genuine. "Maybe that's why we work so well together. We understand each other's damage." The pizza was getting cold, but neither cared. They sat there in their corner booth, talking about everything they'd been afraid to say. About his fear of abandonment and her fear of losing independence. About how love sometimes means being vulnerable enough to let someone see your weaknesses. "I have something for you," he said finally, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out her engagement ring. "I've been carrying this around, hoping—" She held out her left hand without hesitation. "Put it back where it belongs." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, they both felt the rightness of it. This wasn't just a symbol of love or commitment. It was a promise to face their fears together, to build something stronger than their individual damages. "We need rules," she said, admiring how the sapphire caught the candlelight. "Guidelines for how we'll handle big decisions together." "Like a prenup." His tone was teasing. "Like a partnership agreement." She kissed him softly. "No more unilateral decisions. No more running away. We face everything together, even when it's scary. Even when our fears tell us to protect ourselves by pushing the other away," he agreed. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. "Before DC, before all the changes, let's start our life together now." She studied his face, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. "Together, in our own place. A fresh start." "Really?" His eyes lit up. "Really," she smiled. "Let's find somewhere that's ours, not yours or mine, a place we choose together." He pulled her closer, his joy palpable. "I love you, Lana Rory, with all your strength and all your fears and all your dreams." "And I love you, Harlan Jace. With all your protectiveness and all your vulnerability and all your beautiful heart." They stayed in their corner booth long after the pizza was gone, planning their future, healing their past, understanding each other more deeply with every word. The city lights twinkled outside, but their world had narrowed to this moment, this connection, this profound understanding. Later that night, as they walked hand in hand through the village streets, Lana looked up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. "Do you think we'll be happy in DC?" "I think we'll be happy anywhere as long as we're together." He squeezed her hand. "As long as we remember what we learned tonight, which is that love isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfectly honest about our imperfections. That partnership means facing our fears together instead of letting them drive us apart." She stopped, turning to face him under a streetlight. "When did you become so wise?" When I fell in love with a woman who taught me that true strength isn't in having all the answers, it's in being brave enough to ask the questions together. Their kiss was soft, tender, full of promise. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, unnoticed. They didn't need wishes anymore. They had understanding. They had truth. They had each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Chapter 12. A new chapter dawn painted the Washington, D.C. sky in shades of rose and gold as Lana stood before the window of her Supreme Court chambers. In just 1 hour, she would take the oath that would make her the youngest justice in modern history. Her judicial robe lay ready, its pristine black folds a symbol of the responsibility she was about to undertake. Her fingers traced the sapphire pendant at her throat. Harlan's gift on their wedding night 6 months ago. The stone matched her engagement ring perfectly, both pieces carrying the legacy of his family while representing their future together. Nervous? Harlan's voice came from the doorway, and her heart skipped just as it had that first night at the gala. She turned to find him watching her with those intense dark eyes that still made her weak at the knees. His tuxedo was immaculate, but his expression held all the tenderness that only she got to see. Not nervous, she smiled. Ready. He crossed the room to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror. You were born for this moment. We were born for this moment, she corrected, leaning back against him. Everything that led us here, every challenge, every fear we faced, every time we chose to fight for us, it all led to this. Harlan's hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. Remember our first real conversation, when you called me out about the environmental regulations? She laughed softly. And you tried to charm your way around the issue. That was the moment I knew you were different. His voice grew thoughtful. You saw past all my defenses, all my carefully constructed walls. You made me want to be better. A knock at the door interrupted them. Zara entered, now Lana's chief clerk at the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice is ready for you. The ceremony itself was solemn and beautiful. As Lana took her oath, her voice clear and strong, she felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. But more importantly, she felt the strength of love supporting her. Their families filled the front rows, her parents beaming with pride, Marcus and Ruby Rory, who had taught her to fight for justice, Margaret Kingston representing the memory of Sarah, even Amanda, and a healthy Tommy grinning from ear to ear. The reception afterward was held in the Supreme Court gardens. Spring had painted everything in vibrant colors, matching the joy that seemed to radiate from everyone present. Harlan never left her side, his quiet pride evident in every glance, every touch. "Dance with me," he whispered, as the string quartet began playing their song, the same Chopin nocturne from their first concert together. As they moved across the dance floor, other couples stepped back to watch them. They had become something of a modern legend, the businessman who rejected 100 women until he found his perfect match, and the brilliant judge who taught him that real power came from the heart. "I have something to tell you," Lana said softly, her eyes shining with secret joy. "What is it?" She guided his hand to rest against her stomach, still flat, but holding their miracle. "We're going to need to set up a nursery." The wonder that bloomed across his face was breathtaking. "A baby. We're having a baby." She nodded, tears of happiness spilling over. "In about 7 months." He pulled her closer, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "Both of you." Their love had transformed them both. Harlan had found his true purpose in the Jace Foundation, channeling his business acumen into supporting foster children and social justice initiatives. The angry foster kid who built walls around his heart had become a man dedicated to breaking down barriers for others, and Lana had found a way to balance her principles with her heart, her dedication to justice strengthened by understanding the complex human stories behind every case. The young judge, who once feared losing herself in love, had become stronger through partnership. As the evening drew to a close, they stood together on the Supreme Court steps, looking out over the city that had become their new home. The setting sun painted the marble columns in shades of gold and rose, matching the dawn that had started this momentous day. "Happy?" Harlan asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "Beyond happy." She leaned back against him. "This is everything I never knew I was looking for until I found you. You know what Sarah used to say about love?" His voice was soft with memory. "That real love doesn't complete you. It inspires you to complete yourself." She was right. Lana turned in his arms. "You didn't complete me, Harlan. You inspired me to be fully myself, to face my fears, to reach for my dreams. And you showed me that true strength isn't in standing alone," he touched her face tenderly, "but in standing together." As they shared a kiss under the fading sunset, their story had come full circle. From that first charged meeting at the charity gala to this moment of perfect understanding, they had grown from successful individuals into something far more powerful, true partners in love, life, and justice. Their future stretched before them, bright with promise, a baby to love, a foundation to build, justice to uphold, and most importantly, a love that had proved strong enough to overcome every obstacle. Because in the end, their story wasn't just about romance or success or power. It was about two people brave enough to choose love over fear, partnership over control, and truth over appearances. It was about finding the kind of love that doesn't just change your life. It transforms your soul. As they drove home that night, Lana's head resting on Harlan's shoulder, they both knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. The story of two hearts that had found their perfect match, two souls that had found their true purpose, and two lives that had become one beautiful journey. Above them, the stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across velvet, witnesses to a love story that had defied expectations and redefined what was possible when two people chose to believe in each other, in themselves, and in the power of love to transform everything it touched.